Welcome to the Playing Books podcast. Today we are cracking open a book that looks, well, deceptively simple on the surface, but really it contains the blueprint for almost every failed revolution in modern history. George Orwell's Animal Farm. You probably read it back in school, maybe thought of it as just a story about animals, but trust me, this is no simple children's story. It is just a cutting satire, a really profound exploration of power, of betrayal, and, how easily an ideal of total equality can just rot from the inside out.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're focusing today specifically on the incredible descent captured in just the first 8 chapters. This rapid, almost shocking anatomy of control as it starts to take root on Manor Farm.
And that's precisely our mission today, isn't it? We're undertaking a deep dive using the book's own narrative structure, chapter by chapter, as our sort of analytical guide.
Right.
The aim is to extract the crucial lessons this text offers about leadership, about ideological purity or the lack of it, and that relentless human, or in this case animal, hunger for control. And this discussion, we hope, is designed to show you, the listener, how these mechanisms of manipulation that Orwell just lays bare, the power vacuum, the rise of the tyrant, the slow, deliberate erasure of history, how these provide crucial practical insights, things that can really enhance your understanding of power dynamics in your own life, far beyond the farm gates.
Yeah, that structural analysis feels key here. We are just recounting the plot points. We're trying to dissect the process, the step-by-step method of how a dictatorship is built.
Exactly, how it happens.
And just before we dive in, if hearing us talk about these potent themes makes you want to revisit the source itself, definitely consider purchasing the book. There's really nothing quite like reading Orwell's precise, often devastating language firsthand to fully grasp the weight of it all.
Couldn't agree more. So let's start right at the very foundation with what we're calling the seeds of revolution. This is all contained in those opening 2 chapters where the existing system of oppression is, well, it's both defined and then violently overthrown.
Okay, so the entire revolutionary spark, it's ignited by just one character, isn't it? Old Major, the prized middle white boar. He gets all the animals together in the big barn, and he delivers this thesis, really, that's instantly recognizable to anyone who's ever felt they were suffering under an exploitative system. He frames their whole existence with just 3 devastating words: miserable, laborious, and short.
And that phrase is just a masterpiece of revolutionary rhetoric, isn't it? Because it encapsulates the entire core grievance. It just strips away any potential comfort, any sort of romantic notion they might have had about their lives.
Right.
Major really forces them to confront a reality they probably usually ignore, that their lives are defined purely by misery and slavery right there in England. They're forced to work, literally to the last atom of their strength.
Sure.
And the instant their usefulness ends, doesn't matter if you're a horse whose muscles fail or a cow whose milk runs dry, you're slaughtered. With hideous cruelty, he says. There's no retirement, there's no reward at the end, just death.
It's brutal. And crucially, Major gives them a very clear, very simple villain for all this misery. The enemy is defined absolutely. Man. Mr. Jones, the owner of Manor Farm, he's the singular parasite.
Yeah.
Major argues that man is the only creature that consumes without producing anything. He takes their products, the eggs, the milk, the foals, without contributing anything himself except, cruelty and exploitation.
It's a flawless argument for class warfare, essentially. If you just substitute man for, say, the ruling class in any kind of stratified society, it fits perfectly.
It really does.
And this leads directly to the second crucial component you need for any successful revolution. You need that emotional ideology to solidify this abstract vision of freedom, to provide the necessary psychological fuel. Major recalls that powerful old song, Beasts of England.
Ah, yes, the anthem.
Exactly. It's more than just a tune. It's a vision, a powerful vision of a golden future, a day when tyrant man shall be o'erthrown, and the fruitful fields of England shall be trod, as he says, by beasts alone.
And the emotional response to that anthem is so vital to the story's early success, isn't it? They sing it 5 times in succession, just completely swept up in this intoxicating excitement and unity. The song provides that belief, that conviction that sacrifice today is going to lead to some kind of paradise tomorrow. It's the unifying force that manages to transcend species' intelligence levels. It binds them all together in this shared dream.
But what's fascinating here, I think, is that despite all this ideological groundwork, all the dreaming, the revolution itself wasn't actually planned. It wasn't scheduled.
No, not at all.
Old Major dies just 3 nights later, but the revolution proper, it's a spontaneous eruption, a complete accident, really, born out of simple negligence.
Yeah, Jones's carelessness.
Right. Mr. Jones, the very representation of the old order, he's not just malicious, he's drunkenly careless. Orwell gives us that detail. He gets drunk at the Red Lion on Midsummer's Eve.
Right, emphasizing the self-indulgence.
Exactly. And he doesn't come back until midday Sunday. His farmhands, they milk the cows, but they completely fail to feed the animals.
And that specific point, the failure to feed them, that turns out to be the final straw. It's not some grand political act that kicks things off. It's a basic violation of, the social contract, if you like.
Absolutely. The cows, famished, finally just break into the store shed to get food, and suddenly, bang, the rebellion is on. Jones and his men come out swinging whips.
Yeah, trying to regain control.
But the animals are already in full flight. They turn on the men, pursue them in triumph right off the farm. The expulsion is swacked total, and Manor Farm becomes Animal Farm.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that. And this brings us immediately to the next phase, the birth of animalism and early tensions. The immediate aftermath is the sense of intoxicating freedom. But the groundwork for the future failure, well, it had already been laid, starting with this new ideology.
Right, because someone has to decide what comes next. And the intellectual work, it naturally falls to the pigs, doesn't it? They're recognized by everyone as the cleverest animals on the farm. Specifically, it's Snowball, Napoleon, and that small fat pig named Squealer. They're the ones who synthesize old Major's teachings into this formal system of thought they call animalism. They become the new intellectual vanguard.
But their very first challenges, they immediately highlight the persistent, maybe you'd call them human flaws, that the pure ideology of animalism is trying to suppress. Think about the early struggles they have convincing the other animals.
Yeah, like Molly.
Exactly. Molly, the vain white mare, she's immediately worried about losing her luxuries. She asks straight out, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? And she's openly worried about wearing ribbons in my mane.
Things Snowball has to condemn.
He does. The pigs have to argue pretty aggressively that ribbons are a badge of slavery, that liberty is worth far more than superficial vanity and, material comforts like sugar lumps.
And then there's the other challenge, the ideological distraction provided by Moses, the tame raven.
Ah, Sugar Candy Mountain.
Exactly. Moses, who is Mr. Jones's special pet, he promotes this mystical sugar candy mountain, a paradise somewhere up in the sky where it's Sunday 7 days a week and clover is in season all year round.
And the pigs struggle immensely to counter this distraction. This promise of a purely spiritual reward in the afterlife, it kind of dulls the revolutionary fervor needed for change here on Earth. Why bother solving problems today if there's this eternal, effortless paradise waiting for you tomorrow?
It's a classic opiate, isn't it?
Pretty much. So once the humans are finally gone, the pigs move to consolidate their message. They reduce the complex principles of animalism into the 7 commandments.
Painted right there on the barn wall.
In great white letters, yeah. These become the foundational laws. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. All animals are equal. And then the famous prohibitions like no animal shall sleep in a bed, no animal shall drink alcohol, and so on.
It's their attempt at a written constitution, something to guarantee equality forever.
It looks like the perfect legal framework.
It does. But the very first sign of corruption happens, well, almost immediately after they declare this new state. The cows hadn't been milked for a full day.
Right, they were suffering.
And when the pigs milk them, they produce 5 ducats of this frothing, creamy milk. The other animals are naturally looking at it with quite a bit of interest.
Understandably.
But the pigs tell them, never mind the milk, comrades. That will be attended to. The harvest is more important. They argue the priority now is getting the hay in, now that the farm is theirs.
A classic deflection. Focus on the work. Ignore the resource.
And when the animals return that evening from the hayfield,
Gone. The milk has disappeared.
completely, the pigs clearly prioritize securing that milk for themselves over providing transparency or, sharing the very first spoils of their collective victory.
It's the first immediate, and you could argue unforgivable breach of trust, right after the triumph. It signals straight away that the new leadership views itself as somehow above the laws they just finished painting on the wall.
Yeah. And it sets the stage for pretty much everything that follows, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the first crack in the foundation.
Okay, so moving into part 2, chapters 3 and 4, we see the animals implementing the vision in that first summer after the rebellion. And initially, it seems to be working. This period is often described as a kind of golden age of labor.
It really is. The harvest is the biggest the farm had ever seen. Orwell makes a point of saying the animals were genuinely happier. And because the human parasites were gone, there was actually more leisure, too, and more food for everyone. The work of the farm, for a time, went like clockwork.
Yeah, that initial success, it really validates the core idea of animalism, doesn't it? That if the animals could just keep the profits of their own labor, life would be immensely better.
It does, but it's crucial to see that this success is largely built on the incredible dedication of one particular figure, Boxer, the cart horse. We really need to spend a moment on Boxer.
Oh, absolutely, the workhorse.
Yeah.
Literally.
He's immensely strong. His willingness to toil just makes him indispensable. He becomes the admiration of everybody.
And he adopts those two simple, tragically unassailable maxims, I will work harder, and later, Napoleon is always right.
There were days, Orwell writes, when the entire work of the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. He's admired, yes, but he's also intensely exploited from the start. He embodies that ideal of the willing worker who asks no questions.
Which is exactly what a totalitarian state needs to survive, especially in that construction phase.
Precisely. But while Boxer provides the brute physical labor, the pigs provide the intellectual labor, or rather, the supervisory labor.
Right, because they have superior knowledge, as they put it.
Yes. The pigs naturally assumed the leadership roles, directing and supervising everyone else. But noticeably, they don't actually do any physical work themselves.
So that stratification based on supposed intelligence, it immediately starts to reinforce the old class divisions, doesn't it? Even without the human element present.
It does. And the initial methods of leadership quickly reveal the two very different conflicting styles among the pigs, specifically between Snowball and Napoleon.
Yeah, Snowball seems more the idealist initially. He tries to organize the animals through all these bureaucratic committees.
So many committees.
The Egg Production Committee, the Whiter Wool Movement, the Clean Tails League. He even tries that Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee.
Which aimed to tame the rats and rabbits, and it was a complete failure, wasn't it? Miserably so.
Yeah. Why do you think Snowball's efforts were kind of doomed from the start?
Well, I think it's because he focused on the minutiae of ideal living, on organization, on spreading knowledge and literacy. He genuinely tried to teach the other animals to read.
And most were literate to some degree, Orwell notes, like the dogs learned a few letters.
Yes, but the sheep, hens, and ducks, they could even memorize all 7 commandments. And this forces Snowball into that crucial simplification. He has to reduce animalism down to a single maxim.
The one they can all remember.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad. It's a necessary reduction from his perspective, perhaps, but it immediately becomes this incredibly powerful tool of control.
Yeah, that simplification is such a critical political tool. It provides a slogan that completely substitutes for actual thought or understanding. It allows the less intelligent animals, especially the sheep, to just bleat this mantra over and over again and immediately dismiss any argument they don't understand or agree with.
And this intellectual simplification, it coincides perfectly with the rise of the shadow of Napoleon. Because while Snowball is busy with his literacy campaigns and his organizing committees,
Napoleon's playing a different game.
a much longer game. He's focused entirely on the acquisition and consolidation of power. Remember, he took those 9 puppies away from their mothers, Jessie and Bluebell.
Right, saying their education was paramount.
Believing, or claiming to believe, that the education and indoctrination of the young was far more important than trying to re-educate the animals who were already grown. He kept them in absolute seclusion up in a loft in the harness room.
And the rest of the farm soon forgot they even existed.
Which is the definition of long-term planning for dictatorship, isn't it? The quiet cultivation of a personal, loyal, armed security force.
Chilling when you put it like that. And the power dynamic shifts entirely when Squealer, the Minister of Truth figure, steps in to justify the growing inequality in resources.
Yes, the milk and apples mystery.
Exactly. The mystery of the disappeared milk and now the early windfall apples, it's publicly cleared up. They are being mixed exclusively into the pig's mash. The pigs are now visibly, openly breaking the equality rule.
And Squealer's argument for this privilege is just pure rhetorical genius. We really have to analyze it closely.
Okay.
He doesn't appeal to greed or even just simple necessity. He appeals to the collective good, and most effectively, he appeals to fear.
How does he frame it?
He says the pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of the farm depends on them. Their sole object in taking these things is to preserve their health, because the smooth running of the farm depends entirely upon them doing their brain work effectively.
Okay, so it's for the greater good.
And then comes the clincher. What would happen, he asks the other animals, if the pigs failed in their duty? If their brains turned to mush because they weren't getting the proper nutrients from milk and apples?
He answers his own question, doesn't he? With the ultimate weapon.
Jones would come back.
That line. That appeal to the immediate, terrifying threat of the past returning. It works like an electric shock, Orwell says.
It silences all opposition instantly. And it sets the absolute precedent for unequal resource distribution from then on. The pigs are now positioned as indispensable protectors, and their theft, their privilege, is repackaged as necessary self-sacrifice for the good of the group.
Wow. It's incredibly effective manipulation.
It is. And this setup leads us directly into the first major test of this new order. The defense of the farm, which culminates in the Battle of the Cowshed.
Right, because the news of Animal Farm, the rebellion, it had spread across the county. The pigeons were carrying the story.
And the tune of Beasts of England.
Yeah. Human beings, Orwell writes, pretended to laugh it off, but secretly trembled, hearing in it a prophecy of their own future doom.
Naturally, Jones couldn't let it stand. He and his men, armed this time, return early in October to try and reclaim the farm.
And this initial military challenge requires real organization. And this is where Snowball temporarily shines again, isn't it? Proving his worth as a military strategist.
Absolutely. Snowball, having apparently studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns he found in the farmhouse, he plans this brilliant three-stage defense. First, the pigeons and geese launch a skirmishing maneuver, flying overhead, dropping dung, basically feigning an attack to create disorder among the men.
Phase 1, chaos.
Phase 2, Snowball launches the second line of attack with Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep who rush forward and start prodding and butting the men from all sides. The strategy is clearly to lure the humans deeper into the farmyard, into the perfect ambush position.
Okay, drawing them in.
And the ambush culminates right there in the cowshed. The larger animals, the cows, the horses, the pigs who had been lying in wait, suddenly emerge and cut off the men's retreat. They gore, kick, bite, trample the men. Snowball himself charges Jones.
It's quite a brutal scene.
It is. Within 5 minutes of the invasion starting, the humans are in what Orwell calls ignominious retreat, running for their lives. It was a true, decisive victory, a really unifying moment for the animals.
Despite the costs, though. A sheep was killed in the fighting.
Yes, there was a casualty, but they held an immediate, very emotional celebration afterwards. They ran up the flag, the green flag for the fields of England, with the white hoof and horns signifying the future republic of the animal.
And they sang Beasts of England.
Multiple times. This moment, this successful defense of the revolution against the external enemy, it really is the absolute high point of unity and heroism on the farm.
Which makes the internal collapse that immediately follows in the next chapters even more, well, devastating.
Exactly. The peak before the fall.
Okay, so every revolutionary high point seems to be followed by political fallout. And Chapter 5 brings us straight into the hard winter and the great schism that develops between the two leaders, Snowball and Napoleon.
Yeah, the conflict that was probably always simmering beneath the surface really starts to boil over. It grew bitter over farm policy, particularly over the long-term vision for the future of Animal Farm.
How did decisions get made at this point?
Well, while the pigs occupied themselves with planning the work week by week, all the major questions of farm policy were supposed to be decided by a democratic vote at the Sunday meetings, where all the animals could participate.
But the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon became sharper.
Increasingly so. But none of the disputes, Orwell tells us, was quite as bitter as the one over the windmill. This wasn't just a simple policy argument. It was really a battle for the soul of the revolution itself.
Right. Snowball had this grand vision for the windmill, didn't he? He saw it as the key to total liberation for the animals.
He did. He planned to build it on the highest point on the farm, the knoll. It would operate a dynamo and supply the whole farm with electrical power. He talked about light in the stalls, hot and cold water, running machinery like a circular saw, a chaff cutter, an electric milking machine.
He conjured up these pictures of fantastic machines that would do all the work for them while they grazed at ease or improved their minds with reading. It was a classic utopian promise, wasn't it? Sacrifice now, put in the hard work to build it, and then enjoy effortless comfort later.
Absolutely, a 3-day week, essentially. Whereas Napoleon, meanwhile, he opposed the windmill right from the very start. He argued that the great need now was simply to increase food production, because starvation, he argued, was the immediate practical threat they faced.
So production versus progress.
Kind of. Napoleon also argued for defense, saying they needed to procure firearms and train themselves in their use. He basically urinated on Snowball's plans at one point, showing his contempt. The whole farm became deeply divided, with animals taking sides, either following Snowball's idealistic promises of future luxury or Napoleon's more practical, fear-based realism.
And it all comes to a head when Snowball completes his detailed plans for the windmill. He drew them out with chalk on the floor of the incubator shed. This complicated, impressive mass of cranks and cogwheels.
Yeah, painstakingly done over weeks.
And the question was finally put to the vote at the Sunday meeting. Snowball stood up and made this passionate appeal, outlining his reasons, describing the technological marvels that awaited them, painting this picture of Animal Farm free from sordid labor.
And Napoleon's response?
Brief. He just stood up, said quietly that the windmill was nonsense, advised nobody to vote for it, and then sat down again. But then he delivered his real counter-argument, not with logic, but with immediate, brutal violence.
This is the moment.
He uttered this high-pitched whimper, a sound nobody had heard him make before. And suddenly, 9 enormous, fierce-looking dogs, wearing brass-studded collars, the puppies he had secretly raised, came bounding into the barn.
The secret police revealed.
Exactly. They dashed straight for Snowball. The sheer shock of this personal, armed betrayal must have been staggering for the other animals. Snowball, the hero of the Battle of the Cowshed, was chased out of the barn.
He only just escaped.
He did. He slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Snowball's expulsion was complete. And with it, you could say the democratic ideal on Animal Farm died instantly.
The coup was swift, decisive, and total. Napoleon, flanked by his dogs, immediately mounted the raised platform where Major had stood. He announced that Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time.
So no more debates, no more votes?
No. From now on, all questions relating to the working of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. They would meet in private and communicate their decisions afterwards. The animals would still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag, sing Beasts of England, and receive their orders for the week, but that was it.
Their voice is completely gone.
Right.
Power is totally centralized in Napoleon and his inner circle.
And here is where we absolutely must analyze the vital tool of this new regime. Squealer, the minister of truth, he was immediately dispatched around the farm to explain and, crucially, justify this new tyrannical arrangement.
And how does he spin this one? Because it's a blatant power grab.
He insists, through these incredible rhetorical acrobatics, that Napoleon is actually taking on a huge, terrible sacrifice by assuming the leadership. He claims Napoleon truly believes all animals are equal. But, Squealer explains, sometimes the animals might make the wrong decisions, comrades. And then where would they be? Suppose they had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine about windmills. Snowball, who, Squealer hints darkly, was no better than a criminal.
Wow, so he immediately starts rewriting Snowball's reputation while justifying the dictatorship.
Exactly. This is the core justification for totalitarianism, isn't it? You, the masses, must sacrifice your freedom and your decision-making capacity so that better, smarter beings, the elite, can make the right choices for the collective good. It's a heavy responsibility, he implies, that Napoleon is bravely shouldering.
But the absolute genius and the utter cynicism of Napoleon's maneuver becomes clear just 3 Sundays later. He announces that the windmill is going to be built after all.
The ultimate flip-flop.
This is that crucial moment of historical revisionism. Napoleon adopts his opponent's signature policy while simultaneously destroying his opponent's reputation. It's breathtakingly audacious.
And Squealer has to perform an incredible feat of narrative control here to sell this U-turn. He explains privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never actually been opposed to the windmill.
Seriously?
Oh, yes. On the contrary, it was Napoleon who had advocated it in the first place. And the plans which Snowball had drawn on the floor of the incubator shed, they had actually been stolen from among Napoleon's own papers. The windmill was, Squealer insisted, Napoleon's own creation from the very beginning. His opposition had just been a clever tactic to get rid of Snowball, who was a dangerous influence.
That is just astonishingly bold propaganda.
And the animals, already intimidated by the dogs, weakened by fear, and perhaps lacking a strong collective memory of the events that transpired just 3 weeks prior, they simply accepted it. The physical reality of the past, Snowball drawing those plans on the shed floor, is completely replaced by the official narrative dictated by Squealer.
And with that acceptance, the stage is well and truly set for the new tyranny. Orwell writes, quite starkly, All that year, the animals worked like slaves.
Yeah, that line hits hard.
They worked a 60-hour week through the spring and summer. And then Napoleon announced there would be voluntary work on Sunday afternoons as well.
Voluntary with consequences.
Exactly. Any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. This is the mechanism of forced labor hidden behind the thinnest veneer of free choice.
And the irony is just tragic. They rebelled against Mr. Jones, partly to escape the drudgery of work, and now they're working longer hours, harder conditions than they ever did under him.
And again, Boxer is the absolute foundation, keeping this tyranny going, dragging those huge boulders up the slope to the quarry edge, straining his muscles nearly to breaking point. He's working harder than ever, driven by Napoleon's now completely false ideology.
The reality of the farm is worsening, too. The harvest that year was less successful than the previous one, making the coming winter look particularly hard. But the animals accept the hardship, largely because Squealer keeps telling them they are still better off than under Jones and that the sacrifice is noble.
And just as conditions worsen for the masses, they noticeably improve for the elite. The pigs suddenly move into the farmhouse.
A hugely symbolic move.
They start eating their meals in the kitchen, using the drawing room for recreation. And then, the final straw for some, they begin sleeping in the beds. This is such a visible, undeniable breach of one of the founding 7 commandments.
And the animals remembered. Clover especially felt uneasy. She seemed to remember a definite ruling against beds. Muriel the goat is asked to read the commandment.
What does it say now?
It says, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets."
Ah, the subtle addition.
Squealer is immediately there to perform rhetorical damage control, demonstrating this erosion of rules through semantic manipulation. The rule wasn't against beds per se, he insists. A bed is merely a place to sleep, like a pile of straw. The rule was only against sheets, a human invention. That was the real source of evil.
And
besides, Squealer adds, surely they didn't begrudge the pigs, the brain workers, a quiet place to work. Sleeping in a comfortable bed was more suited to the dignity of the leader, Napoleon. And, of course, if the pigs couldn't rest properly,
Jones would come back.
Exactly. Fear wings again. It's a perfect illustration of how power uses semantics, subtle changes in language, to destroy the spirit of the law. The prohibition against adopting human luxuries is completely gutted without the literal commandment having to be erased, just slightly amended.
This escalating oppression builds to a dramatic climax at the end of Chapter 6, with catastrophe and scapegoating. The windmill, which the animals had worked on tirelessly for a year, almost finished,
Their pride and joy.
is destroyed overnight by a violent gale in November. The walls just couldn't stand up to the wind. Logically, the collective exhaustion, the forces of nature, maybe even engineering flaws in the design or construction should be blamed.
But that's not how dictatorships work, is it?
No. Napoleon immediately gathers the animals, surveys the ruin, smells the ground, and then dramatically pronounces the death sentence upon Snowball.
The convenient, ever-present enemy.
He blames the destruction entirely on Snowball's sheer malignity to avenge himself for his expulsion. He claims the traitor crept in under cover of night and deliberately destroyed their work. It's a total dismissal of reality. The storm, the thinness of the walls, instantly replacing it with an easily digestible narrative of enemy action.
And it galvanizes them again, doesn't it?
It does, Napoleon declares. Forward, comrades, long live the windmill, long live Animal Farm. The work must begin again immediately, rebuilding it through the winter. The scapegoat provides the necessary focus and renewed determination.
I think the defining difference as we move into Chapter 7 is the shift in control tactics. It moves from being primarily based on rhetoric and fear of the past. The threat of Jones returning to control, based much more overtly on brute force and fear of the present, fear of Napoleon himself.
Yeah, the atmosphere definitely darkens. The animals endure extreme winter hardship. Orwell describes them as cold and hungry. The corn ration is drastically reduced. There were days when they had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation, he says, seemed to stare them in the face.
And this economic pressure forces Napoleon's hand. To secure enough resources, mainly grain and meal, to keep the farm going until summer, he makes a decision that sparks internal resistance. He orders the hens to surrender their eggs for sale, 400 eggs a week.
And the hens see this as murder.
They do. They protest vehemently. They believed that handing over their eggs at that stage of incubation, essentially for sale to humans, was tantamount to murder. They attempt a proper rebellion, flying up to the rafters and laying their eggs there so they smash on the floor below.
This is the first real, genuine act of collective resistance since Jones was kicked out, isn't it?
It is. And Napoleon's response is the definition of ruthless totalitarian control. No negotiation, no persuasion. He acts ruthlessly. He orders that the hens' rations be stopped entirely.
Starve them into submission?
And he decrees that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen would be punished by death. The dogs enforce this. 9 hens died of starvation before the others finally capitulated after 5 days and went back to their nesting boxes.
So the pigs are now demonstrably willing to murder their own citizens, essentially, for economic gain. They've successfully broken the collective will through brute force.
And just as internal conditions worsen, the propaganda has to intensify to compensate. Snowball, the external enemy, now becomes the universal, invisible enemy.
He is blamed for everything.
Everything. This political necessity always arises when things go wrong internally. You simply cannot blame the leader. So everything that goes wrong, mysteriously broken seed beds, stolen corn, upset milk pails, a misplaced key, it's all attributed to Snowball. He's portrayed as constantly creeping onto the farm at night and performing all kinds of mischief.
He becomes this kind of invisible, malevolent influence, menacing them with all sorts of dangers, justifying constant vigilance and hardship.
Exactly. And this manufactured paranoia, this constant state of emergency, reaches its absolute fever pitch with the show trials and bloodshed. Squealer calls the animals together and announces a terrible thing has been discovered.
What now?
Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchfield Farm, one of the neighboring human farmers. Not only that, but he's been plotting with Frederick to attack Animal Farm, and the final revision, he was actually acting as Jones's secret agent from the very beginning. Even his bravery at the Battle of the Cowshed was faked.
Wow. That rewrites everything. And what's truly chilling here is Boxer's reaction, isn't it?
It is. Boxer, the most loyal, the most hardworking animal, he briefly objects. He says, I do not believe that. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw him myself.
He holds on to the memory, the reality he witnessed.
For a moment. But Squealer counters immediately, saying sharply that their leader, Comrade Napoleon, has stated categorically that Snowball was Jones's agent from the start. He claims this is proven by secret documents that have only now come to light. Confronted by the official narrative, backed by the implied threat of the dogs growling nearby, Boxer tragically submits. He lowers his head and says, if Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right.
The submission of the strongest, most moral animal. That's the final key to absolute control, isn't it? If even Boxer accepts this blatant lie, then anyone will.
Precisely. And just 4 days later, Napoleon orders all the animals to assemble in the yard. He emerges from the farmhouse wearing his medals, flanked by his 9 huge dogs, and lets out that high-pitched whimper again. Immediately, the dogs bound forward, seize 4 pigs by the ear, the same 4 who had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings.
The dissidents.
They're dragged squealing before Napoleon, and they immediately confess. They confess to having been secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion, to collaborating with him in destroying the windmill, and to plotting to hand over Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They even confess that Snowball had admitted to them he'd been Jones's secret agent for years.
It's a textbook show trial. Forced confessions under duress.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. The tale of confessions and executions goes on. 3 hens, the leaders of the egg rebellion, confess to inciting disobedience. A goose confesses to stealing corn. Sheep confess to urinating in the drinking pool, supposedly urged on by Snowball. It continues until there is a horrifying pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away, shaken and miserable.
Orwell writes, the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of Jones.
The sheer terror of that purge is captured perfectly in Boxer's reaction afterwards. He looks over the bloody scene, deeply troubled, and states quietly, I would not have believed that such things could happen on our farm. This is the ultimate death of the revolution's ideals. It has fully cannibalized itself, replacing animalism with absolute lethal dictatorship. The rule of law is completely gone, replaced utterly by the rule of terror.
And Chapter 8 shows the immediate response to that terror. Glorification and renewed conflict. The animals work even harder than they had in the previous year to rebuild the windmill again, driven now primarily by fear, you have to assume, not by ideology.
Definitely fear, and perhaps a desperate need to cling to something. And Napoleon, the architect of that fear, is instantly elevated to an almost godlike status. This is the classic mechanism of the cult of personality kicking into high gear.
He's no longer just Napoleon.
No. He's referred to in formal style as our leader, Comrade Napoleon. The pigs invent increasingly absurd titles for him: father of all animals, terror of mankind, protector of the sheepfold, duckling's friend. Poems are written about him. His image is painted on the barn wall opposite the commandments.
He becomes completely isolated too, right?
Yes, he only appears in public maybe once a fortnight, always attended by his retinue of dogs and a black cockerel who marches in front of him and acts as a trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon speaks. Every successful achievement, every stroke of good fortune is now routinely credited to Napoleon. If a hen laid 5 eggs instead of 4, it was due to his leadership.
This intense cult of personality, it's used to compensate for the violence, the terror, the constant hunger. When the reality of the farm is so bleak, the leader must be made synonymous with the farm's very existence. You have to convince the populace that their suffering is actually a noble sacrifice for this divine leader figure.
And the animals, driven by this mix of fear and propaganda, they finish the rebuilt windmill. They make the walls twice as thick this time. They feel a sense of pride again, marveling at its strength and perpendicularity, their masterpiece, finally complete.
But the harsh reality of the outside world, of external conflict, immediately returns to shatter their fragile sense of security. The second attack comes the very next morning after the windmill is finished.
Friedrichs of Pinchfield Farm, the neighbor Napoleon had recently done business with, selling timber, attacks the farm with about 15 men, all armed with guns.
And this time, it's different from the Battle of the Cowshed.
Very different. The animals fight boldly, courageously even, charging into the gunfire. But this time they lack the element of surprise, and the humans have superior firepower. They suffer heavy casualties. Despite Napoleon's confidence that the thick walls of the windmill would protect it, Frederick's men come prepared.
They use blasting powder.
Yes. They drill a hole into the base of the windmill, pack it with explosives, and detonate the charge. The windmill, the symbol of 2 years of relentless, back-breaking, often voluntary labor, is utterly destroyed, reduced to ruins in an instant.
That final scene is just devastating, isn't it? Closing this section of the book, it demonstrates that all the internal control, all the purges, all the scapegoating, all the glorification of the leader, none of it actually protected the farm from outside forces when push came to shove.
Absolutely. The animals are left with ruin, heavy losses, and a renewed sense of despair, even as Napoleon, seeing the humans driven off eventually, though at great cost, tries to spin the whole bloody affair as a great victory. The Battle of the Windmill.
But the windmill is gone. Their work is gone.
Exactly. The reality is loss and failure masked by propaganda. #outro. So what we've really tracked here, haven't we, from chapter 1 right through to the end of chapter 8, is this rapid, chilling, chronological progression. We saw an ideology, animalism, built on this beautiful promise of utopian equality.
Yeah, that initial dream.
And how quickly it was corrupted. Corrupted fundamentally by, I'd say, 3 main things working together. Napoleon's raw hunger for centralized control, Squealer's absolute mastery of propaganda and historical revisionism, and the incredibly effective weaponization of fear against a populace whose greatest flaw, perhaps, was their inability to question authority and, crucially, to remember the past accurately.
The blueprint for dictatorship really is startlingly clear when you lay it out like that. First, you define the ideal, you give people hope. Old major speech.
Sure.
Second, you establish the foundational law, the promise of fairness, the 7 commandments. Third, you start justifying resource theft, usually through fear, the milk and apples, Squealer constantly invoking, Jones will come back. Fourth, you eliminate your political opposition, often with sudden violence, Snowball's expulsion by the dogs. Fifth, you revise history and even the law itself to support the new elite, the windmill flip-flop, the subtle change to the rule about beds. And sixth, you establish universal terror and wrap it all up in a cult of personality to ensure absolute obedience. The Purge, Napoleon's ridiculous new titles. That, right there in its anatomy, is the crucial difference between the promise of a revolution and the grim, predictable reality of dictatorship.
And I think the book teaches us profoundly that maintaining power, especially this kind of power, is fundamentally less about sheer brute physical force, although that's necessary too, as the dogs show, and far more about the control of memory and the control of language.
Yeah.
When the collective memory is weak, or perhaps when the population lacks the literacy or the critical thinking skills to verify the law or question the narrative, the ruling elite can literally convince the populace that the past was different from how they remember it. They can convince them that their current suffering is actually some kind of noble sacrifice or even a glorious victory like the Battle of the Windmill.
So here's our challenge to you, the listener. Now that you've seen this rapid, tragic descent of Animal Farm laid out, how does this knowledge inform your own scrutiny of leadership and rhetoric? We really want you to actively participate in this knowledge. Think about it. Where in your own world, maybe in politics, maybe in your workplace, maybe even just in your social sphere, do you see echoes of these tactics, the shifting commandments, the appeal to external fear being used to justify internal privilege or control? It's a lesson that feels utterly timeless, unfortunately.
And remember, the narrative we've covered stops here before we see the absolute final fate of Animal Farm. We haven't reached the ultimate destination of this descent into tyranny, where we understand the full, horrifying meaning of those corrupted commandments, especially the most famous one about equality. So consider this as your final provocation. What further depths of corruption, what new forms of control might be reached when history, truth, and language become entirely subservient to power? When the distinction between the rulers and the original oppressors becomes, well, completely meaningless.
To fully grasp the book's enduring power and its devastating conclusion, we really do strongly encourage you to purchase and read George Orwell's Animal Farm. It's a quick read, but it stays with you.
It certainly does.
Thank you so much for joining us for this in-depth discussion today. If you found these lessons enlightening or even just thought-provoking, please do follow, subscribe, and maybe share the Playing Books podcast with someone else who might appreciate it. We'll see you for the next deep dive.